In one of the cities of the Tendo state, an odd series of events unfolded daily in the house of a general. Despite the commotion, a young woman, Miss Su Tang, enjoyed her sleep while the servants scurried frantically around her. A loud male voice suddenly commanded the arrest of someone and insisted they be brought to the house. The man explained that the quality of Miss Su Tang's rest depended entirely on the diligence of the servants. When Su Tang, a brunette, finally awoke, she was perplexed by the situation. She had a throbbing headache and could not comprehend why they were trying to apprehend someone. She was supposed to be in an operating room, yet here she was, in a grand mansion that horrified her upon first glance. However, her attention soon shifted to the odd group of people inside the room. Several men, dressed only in robes that barely concealed their well-toned physiques, continued to dance, seemingly for her amusement. Miss Su Tang was taken aback but couldn't help but feel embarrassed, even as her curiosity grew. At that moment, an elderly man rushed into the room, overjoyed that Miss had awakened. He tearfully exclaimed that she was the legitimate daughter of the general of Tenda State, Su Tang. Still disoriented, the girl struggled to remember her name and surroundings, while the old man tearfully recounted a prophecy from a witch, saying that after Miss fell into the cold rod, her body was consumed by negative energy. To recover, she needed male energy to fully awaken. As the pieces of her memory fell into place, Su Tang realized that the names Tenda State and Su Tang were from the novel All Villains Must Be Killed, a book she had been reading late into the night. Suddenly, the reality of her predicament hit her. She was inside the novel itself. Frustrated by the absurdity of it all, she cursed loudly, causing the old man to wince and ask her to restrain herself. Meanwhile, the servants continued searching for the general. Lying back down, Miss Su couldn't fathom how she had ended up in a fictional world, especially as a character she had once insulted for her cruel nature and poor parenting. Su Tang hated this character, and the last thing she wanted was to remain trapped in this narrative. She longed for her real life, with air conditioning, her beloved cat, and a bowl of hot noodles. As she rolled on the floor in frustration, a panel appeared before her, like a portal to a parallel dimension. The system instructed her on how to survive in this world and not allow Su Junling to be defiled. It was made clear that if she failed in her task, she would be stuck in the book forever, becoming an extreme character doomed to a tragic death. Determined to change her fate, Su Tang wasted no time. She inquired about the whereabouts of the fifth prince, and the old man informed her that the general had gone to meet him at the palace. Despite being in a coma for 3 days, Miss Su quickly adapted to her new role and commanded the servants to assist her in changing clothes. Her confident demeanor startled the maid, who was surprised that Miss Su could know about the prince's arrival while unconscious. Nevertheless, Su Tang, now fully immersed in the character, dismissed everyone from the room, knowing this part of the story all too well. In the original tale, Su Tang had been in a coma for 3 days and nights after her fall into the cold rod. No one could save the poor boy at the pond, so in desperation, they called a witch. She claimed that Miss Su Tang needed men to help rid her body of negative energy. As a result, Su Tang was caught by the fifth prince, who, misinterpreting the situation, believed she was engaging in indecent behavior in broad daylight. From that moment on, her reputation took a nosedive, and she became the subject of vicious rumors. Meanwhile, the prince and his guards were headed to meet Su Junling, with the intention of punishing the boy. They had already devised a cruel plan to break the child's legs, aiming to weaken and humiliate him. Su Junling, though too young and powerless to resist, continued to face abuse. This violent oppression fed into a growing wave of hatred against the child, a factor that jeopardized Su Tang's mission in this world. Outside, a blood-stained cage held Su Junling, who had already endured severe torture. Shanan Yi, a man involved in the bullying, cruelly referred to the child as damned, inciting laughter from the crowd. Yet, they were amazed by the boy's continued defiance. Su Junling was given an ultimatum: either kneel and bow to the palace, or have his legs broken. Many bystanders echoed the prince's words, trying to crush the boy's spirit. Some even remarked that his own mother had abandoned him, further deepening his despair. In tears, Su Junling removed his hood and, through sobs, declared his refusal to submit or worship those who tormented him. This angered the prince, who couldn't believe the boy, an outcast, would dare defy the palace's authority. Su Junling gripped the cage bars with his small, sharp teeth bared, prepared for more suffering. Shanini suggested breaking his legs to force him into submission, and one of the men reached into the cage, prompting the child to retreat into a corner. However, just as the punishment was about to be carried out, Sui Tang arrived, breathless from her haste to stop them. She demanded everyone halt immediately. Her son, Su Junling, looked at her for the first time with a mixture of fear and surprise. Though he was much shorter, their resemblance was unmistakable. Sui Tang knelt beside the cage, extending her hand to the terrified boy. Despite his fears that his mother didn't love him, and that she might hate him even more after this latest incident, Su Junling cautiously approached. Contrary to his expectations, Sui Tang did not yell or scold him. Instead, she gently wiped the dirt from his face, an act of tenderness that shocked the child. This was the first time his mother had ever touched him with such care, and Su Junling, too stunned to move, remained still, afraid of doing anything that might anger her. Turning her attention to the fifth prince, Sui Tang demanded her son's release, stating firmly that he was not an animal to be caged. The prince, taken aback by her assertiveness, sarcastically inquired why Miss Su had left her house, insinuating that she was no longer satisfied with the men around her. Unperturbed, Sui Tang retorted that his jealousy was unbecoming. According to the book's original plot, Sui Tang was not only a skilled martial artist but also the wife of Shanini. However, a conspiracy later led to her body becoming deformed, causing their engagement to break off. Her husband declared that she was no longer worthy of the palace. At that moment, Su Junling, despite his small size, lunged forward and bit one of the offender's hands in defense of his mother. Though his efforts were valiant, the prince was stronger and easily pushed the child aside. This wasn't the first time Su Junling had bitten someone in an attempt to protect himself or his mother. Sui Tang, touched by her son's bravery, hugged him tightly. Despite the tumultuous past between them, Su Junling had continued to defend her. Outraged, the prince ordered his servants to drag Su Junling into the hall, intent on killing the boy. His desire for cruelty reached a peak when he threatened to flay the child's skin to inflict maximum pain. But Sui Tang, standing between her son and his attackers, vowed that no one would lay a finger on him. Su Junling watched in awe as his mother fiercely defended him, astonished by the dramatic change in her demeanor. The prince, too, was struck by how much the once indifferent relative had transformed. After the last confrontation, Shanini sternly warned Sui Tang that if she continued to shield the demon Su Junling, she should not expect any mercy from the palace. Amid this tense exchange, an unexpected distraction appeared. A large, healthy dog materialized from nowhere and immediately lunged at the prince. Shanini, startled, attempted to flee, with the dog chasing him in circles around his ex. Sui Tang, herself terrified of dogs, hoped the animal wouldn't notice her. Thankfully, the dog eventually stopped chasing the prince, instead shifting its attention toward the now frightened heroine. Realizing the danger, Sui Tang bolted toward the palace. In her panicked state, she accidentally bumped into a stranger, nearly knocking him over. Barely catching himself, the man had no time to react as the dog's furious barking grew louder behind them. Sui Tang, in a panic, instinctively leapt toward the stranger, screaming for help. The dog, surprised by her dramatic reaction, chose to observe rather than pursue her further. But as the heroine landed, she found herself atop something, or rather, someone softer than the ground. As her hands ran across his torso, she could feel the firm, muscular body beneath her. Even more startling, her lips brushed against something warm. When she opened her eyes, she was mortified to find herself face to face with the very man she had landed on, who, by the looks of it, was just as shocked as she was by their unintended intimacy. Embarrassed and flustered, Sui Tang quickly tried to justify herself, but fear got the better of her, and she instinctively grabbed onto the man's torso again. The stranger, now visibly irritated, asked her to stop touching him so intimately. By now, a crowd had gathered, watching the odd scene unfold. People whispered in shock, appalled by the sight of a lady sitting on a stranger in such an undignified manner. Sui Tang, realizing the awkwardness of the situation, still couldn't bring herself to remove her hand from the man's kimono. Frustrated, the white-haired stranger Bailey, as Sui Tang would later recognize him, became angrier, demanding that she stop pawing at him. The heroine, finally regaining some composure, quickly withdrew her hand and tried to offer an explanation. Just as the tension escalated, a familiar voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd. Tong Ton, what are you doing? The voice belonged to none other than her father, General Su Junling. He marched forward, blocking the path between his daughter and the stranger. The general, without fully understanding the situation, assumed Bailey was harassing Sui Tang and ordered her to stay away from him. It seemed General Su had strong opinions about Bailey, believing that anyone who got too close to the chancellor's son was destined for misfortune. Bailey, stunned by the general's harsh words, didn't know how to respond. Sui Tang, meanwhile, suddenly recognized the man standing before her as Bailey, a character from the novel. In the original story, her character, Tang Tang, had a bitter rivalry with Bailey, one that almost led to her death. Now, face to face with him in this new reality, Sui Tang's mind raced, uncertain of what to do next. As the general continued to scrutinize Bailey, he demanded to know why the man had allowed himself to even glance at his daughter. Bailey, taken aback by the accusations, made no effort to defend himself. However, before any further confrontation could erupt, their attention was abruptly diverted by the sounds of barking and the piercing scream of the fifth prince. To everyone's surprise, the angry dog had found Shainin again and had sunk its teeth into his leg. The prince struggled in vain to escape, his cries echoing throughout the courtyard as the dog refused to let go. Sui Tang, watching the chaos unfold, couldn't help but wonder why the dog seemed intent on chasing only the prince and no one else. As she glanced over at her son, Su Junling, she noticed the faintest hint of a smile on his face. When Shainin struck Su Junling, the child managed to toss a special powder that provoked the dog to attack the prince. Tang Tang noticed the mischievous smile on her son's face and immediately understood that it was his doing. The prince, now completely helpless, stopped resisting and began shouting for help. The guards quickly subdued the dog, and Shainin was placed on a stretcher. Interestingly, the dog didn't resist at all when the guards took it by the scruff of the neck. Sui Tang ordered the servants to fetch a doctor for the injured fifth prince. An old man nearby was visibly shaken and distressed by the prince's condition, lamenting how weak the emperor's son had become. Shainin, even as he lay on the stretcher, barked orders at the servants, displeased with the way they were handling him. As he was carried away, Shainin noticed Sui Tang's expression of smug satisfaction, suspecting that she took delight in his misfortune, especially since they were once married. Meanwhile, General Su Junling observed Bailey staring at his daughter and was immediately incensed. He questioned why Bailey, the chancellor's son, had dared to come to the palace. Bailey, refusing to be cowed, retorted that Sui Tang had been the one to throw herself into his arms, and entirely of her own volition. Tang Tang, embarrassed by his blunt response, fell silent. Her father, however, was quick to defend her, asserting that his daughter would never be interested in a brat like Bailey. Bailey, towering over Sui Tang, leaned closer and asked her why, if it was truly accidental, she had touched him several times in a row. Though she regretted her actions, Tang Tang refused to let herself be belittled and coolly responded that while Bailey might be attractive, he wasn't to her taste. She suggested that perhaps he had intentionally allowed her to touch him back. The general, eager to end the situation, hastily covered his daughter's mouth and declared that Bailey, no matter how much he liked to provoke, would not be allowed near his daughter. General Su Junling offered to send 2,000 gold pieces to the chancellor's family as compensation, but Bailey refused the handout. Tong Tong found herself secretly pleased. It was satisfying to see Bailey angry rather than her father. She then glanced over at her son, Su Junling, who had grown anxious, fearing that his mother was about to punish him. The boy hung his head, fully expecting to be yelled at for his earlier actions. To Tang Tang's surprise, she noticed a strange black fog enveloping the child. Concerned, she knelt beside him and asked how he was feeling. Su Junling, frightened and unsure, pressed his small hands to his body, expecting the worst. But instead of anger, his mother gently took his hands in hers. Su Junling was taken aback. His mother was calm and caring, a stark contrast to what he had known. She asked him what was hurting him, and the black fog surrounding the boy began to dissipate. Su Junling, relieved yet still nervous, asked for forgiveness. He admitted to spilling the powder that had caused all the chaos, convinced that his mother would punish him for it. Tang Tang, however, remembered the episode from the book and knew that it wasn't her son's fault but rather the fifth prince and his servants. Anger welled up inside her, knowing how hard her son had worked to create the potion, only to have it ruined by those arrogant nobles. Despite the harsh treatment Su Junling had endured, he had always remained diligent and honest. Her heart softened for the innocent boy. Su Junling braced himself for the punishment he believed was coming, but Tang Tang simply said that she had to leave. The boy, clearly shocked by his mother's restraint, watched in disbelief as she extended her arms, offering him a hug. Su Junling, however, recoiled and refused, insisting that he was too dirty to be touched. Tang Tang realized how poorly the boy's previous mother had treated him, and it became clear that this kind of affection was completely foreign to him. Understanding the need to take things slowly, she decided to postpone the embrace for now. Looking closer, Tang Tang noticed the bruises on her son's thin, fragile arms and his weak, malnourished body. She immediately ordered the head servant to summon a doctor to tend to his wounds. To her shock, the servant outright refused, stating that Su Junling was nothing more than a ragamuffin and unworthy of medical attention. Furious, Tang Tang began to argue with the servant, refusing to let such nonsense stand. Her eyes scanned the miserable yard where her son lived. His living conditions were worse than those of livestock. Despite all this, Su Junling was elated. For the first time, his mother had spoken to him at length. Eager to impress her, the boy hurriedly rearranged and wiped down an old, worn-out stool. Though the wood had turned black from age, he rubbed it so hard that it began to shine again. Tang Tang couldn't help but feel a pang of sorrow. Her son was so eager to help, so desperate for approval, that it made his situation all the more tragic. After Su Junling finished cleaning the stool, he proudly announced that everything was tidy and invited his mother to sit. Though his own cape still had a few stains, Sui Tang decided to rest, sitting down on the stool as she gently stroked her son's head. She then told him he would be moving to the palace. The manager, however, interjected, insisting that the demon could not reside in her home. Tang Tang questioned why this was impossible, and the manager reminded her that it was because of Su Junling that she had lost her fighting strength and that her engagement had been terminated. He also claimed that the boy was a curse on the family. Inwardly, Sui Tang reasoned that someone had likely orchestrated her loss of reputation. According to the book, while Su Junling was still in the womb, he had absorbed all the toxins, which is why the heroine hadn't died during childbirth. The boy, however, remained optimistic, saying that he was happy living in the barn because his mother was kind to him. Without further arguing with the manager, Sui Tang took her son by the hand and led him into the house, stating that she would find another doctor for him. As they made their way upstairs, Su Junling marveled at the grandeur of the mansion where his mother lived. Sui Tang told him that the palace had many rooms, and he could choose whichever one he liked. Still concerned about his appearance, the boy noted that he was dirty and smelly, just as he had been a few minutes ago. He asked if his mother had lied about him moving in. Tang Tang chuckled and reassured him that he was indeed living in the palace now. Gently stroking him, she made him feel at ease, his face lighting up with joy. At that moment, a servant entered the room, informing Sui Tang that she had received a letter. As Su Junling excitedly ran around exploring his new surroundings, Tang Tang opened the letter. It contained an urgent request for a meeting, and she suddenly remembered that Tang Tang had a disciple. In the book, the disciple had been described as having great potential, but his character had remained somewhat of a mystery to the heroine. As she pondered this, a system notification popped up, announcing an additional mission. She was to meet with Tang Tang's student. Curious about the rewards for completing this task, Tang Tang wondered what she might gain from the mission. The system immediately provided an answer. If she succeeded, Su Junling's filth would be reduced. Hearing this, her son extended his hand to her, thrilled at the possibility of becoming cleaner. Realizing that this mysterious disciple could prove to be beneficial, Sui Tang lovingly stroked her son's hair, causing his small tail to wag with happiness. Before leaving to attend the meeting, she instructed the manager to ensure that when the doctor arrived, he should treat all of Su Junling's wounds and help him wash up. This time, the manager did not argue and simply nodded in agreement. With that, Sui Tang set off for her meeting, though Su Junling still longed to stay by her side, watching her leave with a mix of hope and uncertainty. Not long after, the doctor arrived at the palace. Upon being shown Su Junling, the boy instinctively hid behind the servant, wary of the stranger. The doctor seemed kind at first, but his demeanor quickly changed when he noticed Su Junling's ears. Shocked, the doctor declared that it was a terrible joke on the butler's part. After all, a half-demon like Su Junling had no right to be treated by an elite physician. Horrified, Su Junling quickly tucked his ears under his hood. Despite the manager explaining that it was a direct order from Sui Tang, the doctor refused to examine the child. He coldly stated that treating a monster like Su Junling could cost him his job, and it would be better for the boy to die from his illness. With that, the doctor turned on his heels and left the palace. Unfazed by the doctor's departure, the manager called for the maids to assist with Su Junling's bath. One of the maids, however, sneered at the boy, warning that they wouldn't allow the dirt and stench of a demon to spread throughout the palace. With cruelty in her eyes, she addressed Su Junling directly, telling him that she knew Miss Sui Tang better than anyone and that the mistress hated him more than anyone else. The workers, puzzled by how Sui Tang had allowed the child into the yard, began gossiping amongst themselves, expressing their disbelief. The maid, grabbing Su Junling by the scruff of his neck, laughed as she prepared to carry out her version of Sui Tang's orders. As she dragged the terrified boy, she made it clear that in the Tenda state, half-demon, half-human children like him were despised and never shown mercy. Despite the cruelty and the mocking tone of the maid, Su Junling held on to a fragile hope. He didn't believe that his mother hated him, but the harsh words and laughter of the servants made him doubt his own worth as they prepared to cleanse him. The servants dragged the outcast Su Junling to the lake, ignoring his pleas to stop. Despite the boy's protests, they callously seized him by his arms and legs, with one of the maids remarking that he was being too noisy and needed to be silenced quickly. Without hesitation, they threw the poor child into the water. Struggling to stay afloat, Su Junling barely managed to reach the surface, his small body floundering helplessly. He couldn't understand why his mother, who had shown him kindness, would allow this torment to happen, why she would deceive him with what seemed like fake love. Meanwhile, Sui Tang had arrived at the designated meeting spot at the mountainside. She was searching for someone, but since she didn't know the student's name, she simply called out, addressing him as student. She strained to hear any response, and soon, the rustling of leaves caught her attention, followed by the faint sound of an animal snoring. Intrigued, Tang Tang carefully approached the bushes, wondering what kind of creature it could be. Peeking through the foliage, she saw an animal that looked like it could be either a fox or a dog, but she couldn't quite tell. With a mix of curiosity and affection, she edged closer to the creature. She speculated that if it were a puppy, it was an unusually beautiful and surprisingly non-aggressive one. The sight of the animal melted her heart. The beast stirred and opened its eyes, clearly startled by her presence. But Tang Tang, unconcerned about any potential danger, began gently stroking the animal's soft fur. The creature, however, was no ordinary animal. It was, in fact, a shapeshifter in human form known as Bailey. Recognizing Sui Tang, Bailey was both confused and annoyed, wondering what had brought the general's daughter to such a remote place. He tried to express his irritation, but all that came out was a frustrated growl. Oblivious to the animal's internal turmoil, Sui Tang continued to stroke and hug it, commenting on how fluffy and pleasant it was to the touch. Despite his growing anger, Bailey found himself enjoying the attention, especially the way she rubbed his neck. Even though he was mentally protesting, all Tang Tang could hear were his snorts of dissatisfaction. Suddenly, Tang Tang dropped the animal, startled by its strange behavior. Bailey, the man behind the fox form, sat dazed on the ground, confused as to why, despite speaking clear human language, all that emerged from his mouth was a fox's howl. This had only ever happened when he was injured. To his annoyance, Sui Tang once again grabbed him by the face, believing him to be some ordinary animal. Bailey tried to cover her mouth with his paw to silence her laughter, but she only laughed harder, commenting on the piercing gaze of the little creature. Sui Tang reassured the animal that she hadn't poisoned any puppies, urging it to relax. Bailey, enraged, managed to convey that he was a fox and not a dog, but again, Tang Tang only heard another annoyed growl. Pondering for a moment, she speculated that the animal might not be a dog after all, which slightly impressed Bailey. Raising him to her eye level, she sternly stated that foxes were known to be angry creatures. Without warning, Tang Tang hugged the animal tightly and declared that its beauty had earned her compassion, and she intended to save its life. That's when she noticed that the fox was actually wounded. Determined to nurse it back to health, she decided to take it home, imagining that its presence could foster kindness and compassion in Su Junling, perhaps even helping to reduce the filth that clung to him. Bailey, still trapped in his fox form, couldn't help but blush at the thought of being embraced by Tang Tang in his human form. Despite his irritation, he found himself warming to her touch. As she carried him, he placed his paws on her arms and made himself more comfortable, eventually sniffing her hair and enjoying the pleasant scent. Satisfied, the fox nestled into her arms and quickly drifted off to sleep. Tang Tang, still waiting for her student to appear, grew restless. Frustrated by his absence, she decided it was time to return home. Upon arriving at the palace, she quickly learned what the maids had done to her son. Furious, she confronted the servants, demanding to know why they had treated Su Junling so cruelly. The maids, showing no remorse, confessed that they had only wanted to mock the demon. One of the maids even added that they had believed it was perfectly acceptable to do so, as no one in the Tenda state showed kindness to half-demons. Outraged by their heartless behavior, Tang Tang prepared to set things right, her mind already racing with ways to protect her son and punish those who dared harm him. Sui Tang, once guilty of mocking and banishing her son to the barn, was now infuriated by the maid's literal interpretation of her previous actions. She demanded to know where her son was after the servant's cruel treatment. The servant coldly replied that they had thrown the demon out of the yard, and he had likely returned to his place in the barn. In the barn, Su Junling sat alone on a bed of straw, soaked and shivering. His small, fragile body was cold and weak, his mind replaying the painful events of the day. He remembered his mother and longed for an explanation, but his young heart was filled with despair. Unable to hold back his emotions any longer, he began to cry, curling into himself in a futile attempt to stay warm. The heroine, Su Tang, rushed into the yard, calling out loudly for her son, Su Junling, unable to see where he was. Su Junling, hidden under his hood, was surrounded by thickening darkness. The black fog, which mysteriously reflected the boy's mood, had grown denser. Su Tang, confused by the sudden appearance and disappearance of the fog, was frustrated. The system activated and informed her that the fog's intensity mirrored the demonic energy linked to her son's emotions. Su Tang was angry at the management, as they had promised that when her son met the disciple, the corrupt influence over him would diminish. Now, with her son's emotional state worsening, the situation only seemed to grow more complicated. Su Tang noticed the fog thickening further, and to her alarm, her son was pressed against the fence, hiding behind his little fox. Su Junling, upset, told his mother he didn't want to burden her with his problems. He clarified that he no longer wanted to make her angry. The heroine knew she needed to do something urgently, as the boy's corruption was escalating, and she had already failed the additional mission. Su Tang asked why his clothes were wet, concerned that something had happened. Her son stubbornly replied that everything was fine, but Su Junling couldn't stop remembering the cruel words of the servants. They had told him that his mother despised him for being a half-demon. Unable to hold back, Su Junling began crying, telling his mother that the workers were always making fun of him, and he just wanted them to stop. Su Tang realized that her son was terrified and hadn't yet grasped that the worst was over. Feeling deeply for her son, Su Tang tried to comfort him, telling him she never meant him any harm. She climbed out of the stable, promising to return soon. Su Junling, however, was relieved that she was leaving, mistakenly believing his mother would prefer not to see him, the outcast demon. The boy wiped his eyes and noticed a small puppy lying nearby, fast asleep. A small wound on the fox's hind leg immediately caught his attention, and Su Junling, concerned, asked if the little animal was in pain and if it had parents. The puppy, Bailey, woke up, clearly annoyed to be called a dog again, but Su Junling thought the animal looked pitiful. He understood that even though his mother didn't love him like other mothers, she was still there for him. Su Tang was about to leave the yard but paused when she noticed her son's newfound attention to the fox cub. Su Junling, worried for the fox, decided to cover it with his blanket. Though the fox didn't resist, it was clear that it still didn't fully trust him. Su Tang was touched to see her son's gentle care for the little creature. She knew that children naturally had compassion for animals, and seeing her son express it brought her a moment of peace. Just then, two strong servants arrived, bringing a large vat filled with warm water. They reported that the water was at an ideal temperature. Su Tang persuaded her son to take a bath, as his wet clothes could lead to him getting sick. However, Su Junling, still burdened by his belief that his mother disliked him, thought the bath was only to prevent infection. He feared that Su Tang was merely concerned about appearances in the palace. Su Tang asked if he needed help undressing, but Su Junling, ever hesitant, asked if there was a way to avoid the bath altogether. Su Tang insisted that the bath was necessary to prevent him from getting sick. Resigned to his fate, Su Junling silently agreed, realizing there was no way out. Su Junling changed into a robe and climbed into the vat, steam rising around him. He had not expected the water to feel so warm and comforting. Lying back, with only his head above the water, he marveled at how nice it felt. He hadn't experienced such comfort in a long time. Su Tang offered to help him wash, but Su Junling quickly splashed water at her hands and swam to the other side, refusing. He explained that in their culture, men and women weren't supposed to touch each other unless they were married or engaged, as it was considered improper. Su Tang was surprised her son knew such customs and playfully pinched his nose, reminding him that she was his mother and had given birth to him. She had every right to care for him. Su Junling touched his face, taken aback by his mother's gentle, sparkling smile. As Su Tang stroked his head, Su Junling's hidden demon tail suddenly poked out. Embarrassed, he hurried to hide it, fearing his mother's reaction. He knew his mother disliked his demonic traits, and he had always been careful to conceal them since childhood. Su Junling, flustered, admitted that he hated having fur and had always wanted to rip it off. But Su Tang lovingly reassured him, telling him his features were unique and that many would be jealous of his special qualities. Just then, the manager, Zhang, arrived with a box of medicine. Su Tang instructed him to bring it closer to the vat. Su Junling noticed how expensive the medicines were and felt guilty, thinking it was too much to spend on him. But Su Tang was firm. She placed her hands on his shoulders and told him that money didn't matter when it came to his health. One day, he would understand just how much his mother cared for him. Su Junling, still in disbelief, felt like it was all a dream, hearing such loving words from his mother. Su Tang sat him on her lap and began carefully applying medicine to his ear with a cotton swab. Su Junling winced in pain and tears welled up in his eyes. Worried, Su Tang quickly blew warm air onto the wound to ease the burning sensation, gently stroking his head to calm him. Her tender care brought Su Junling to tears again, but this time they were tears of joy. He felt truly loved by his mother in a way he had never experienced before. As Su Tang finished, she reminded her son not to touch his fur until the medicine dried. Just as she was about to put away the box, she noticed the little fox, Bailey, fast asleep nearby. Remembering the fox's unhealed wound, Su Tang picked up the creature and gently treated its paw as well. Bailey stirred slightly, feeling the soothing touch, but remained peaceful under Su Tang's care. Bailey, in his fox form, was thoroughly displeased as Su Tang sat beside him, tending to his wounds. The idea of anyone touching his fur, let alone cutting it, was intolerable. He hated being trapped in his animal form, but the injury left him no choice. Su Tang, unaware of his inner turmoil, carefully examined his wounds and concluded that the best way to treat them would be to shave off some fur. This suggestion filled Bailey with dread. As a human trapped in the body of a fox, he couldn't bear the thought of being shaved like a common animal, especially when his fur would naturally shed if he were in his human form. Bailey jumped out of Su Tang's arms in protest. There was no way he would allow her to touch his fur, let alone shave it off. Su Tang, taken aback, wondered aloud if the fox could understand human speech, noticing how it fluffed up its fur in defiance. Amused by the fox's strong reaction, she speculated that it was simply unwilling to have its fur cut. Bailey nodded subtly, confirming her suspicion. This reaction amused Su Tang, but she remained determined to continue treating him. Seeing the fox's resistance, Su Tang decided to skip the haircut but had another idea in mind. She grabbed Bailey by the scruff of his neck and carried him towards the vat of warm water, which was still steaming from when her son had bathed. Bailey, fully submerged for a second, felt a flash of discomfort as his fur soaked in the water. In his mind, he imagined what it would be like to be in the bath as a human, an idea that filled him with shame. However, Su Tang was unfazed, grabbing hold of his wet fur and beginning to clean him thoroughly. She made sure to scrub every inch, including his sensitive belly, which sent Bailey into a panic. He struggled to climb out of the vat, fearing both the indignity of the situation and the closeness to his former enemy. Su Tang, noticing his discomfort, thought she had hurt him, but she still held him firm, assuring him she would finish quickly. As Su Tang reached down to clean his stomach again, Bailey cringed, imagining how embarrassing it would be if she saw him as a human in such a state. Su Junling, meanwhile, hid in the nearby barn, watching the scene unfold. The boy was filled with confusion and jealousy as he saw his mother lavishing attention on the fox. He thought to himself that perhaps his mother didn't need him at all, especially when she seemed to care more for this injured animal. After finishing the bath, Su Tang pulled the fox out of the water, his fur now smooth and silky. She noted that Bailey still seemed unhappy, and with a teasing tone, asked how long he planned to glare at everyone so menacingly. As she looked at the fox, a realization dawned on her. She recalled a scene from a novel she once read, where a character had the ability to transform into a fox. Su Tang began to wonder if Bailey might be more than just an ordinary fox. Su Tang hugged the fox tightly, certain that this particular creature couldn't possibly be the same character from the novel. As Bailey jumped back to the ground, Su Tang reached out again, trying to stop him. Bailey, still confused about her intentions, tried to resist, but she gently grabbed his leg and began applying medicine to his wound. He was surprised at her persistence and care, despite being one of her enemies. Meanwhile, Su Junling continued to observe the interaction between his mother and the fox. His jealousy grew stronger as he watched her use the same expensive medicine on the animal that she had used on him. He felt like nothing more than a pet in her eyes, just like the fox. The darkness within him began to resurface as he convinced himself that his mother's sudden affection was nothing more than a passing whim. When Su Tang finished treating the fox, she hugged it close once more, causing Su Junling's jealousy to peak. He instantly hated the fox, believing that if it weren't for the animal, his mother's attention would have been solely on him. Su Tang approached the barn where her son was hiding and asked if he liked the little fox. Su Junling, hiding his emotions behind a calm facade, responded that the animal was very beautiful and must have been to his mother's liking. Su Tang smiled and made a decision. She told her son that she would give him the fox as a pet, hoping that by caring for the animal, Su Junling might develop kindness and compassion. She believed this could help reduce the demonic influence over him. Naturally, Su Junling eagerly agreed to his mother's proposal, but in his mind, he was already coming up with a plan. He looked at the fox with suspicion, his thoughts darker than his words. Bailey, now suspicious of the boy's sly look, felt uneasy. He had a bad feeling about becoming Su Junling's pet, but there was little he could do to escape the situation. Su Tang, touched by the way her son seemed to accept the animal, believed that everything was starting to work out for her son's benefit. She had no idea that her son's growing jealousy and resentment were far from being resolved. Bailey, on the other hand, didn't expect Su Tang to actually leave him in the care of a 5-year-old demon child. Su Tang gently reminded her son of her earlier proposal to move him into the palace to protect him from the cruelty of the servants. But Su Junling resisted, insisting that he already had a home in the lower courtyard, in the stables where he lived alone. Su Tang realized that she needed to be patient. After years of suffering, it would take time to earn her son's trust. As night fell, Su Junling gently petted the now sleeping fox in his arms. Bailey had long fallen asleep, warmed by the boy's embrace. But even then, Su Junling's jealousy hadn't disappeared. He whispered to the fox, asking why it had decided to steal his mother's attention. He wondered why his mother hugged the animal more than she ever hugged him. The darkness around him thickened once more. Su Junling, holding the small fox Bailey, lifted the animal higher, his face twisted in cold determination. The child, consumed by jealousy, stated that the fox looked pitiful, blaming it for stealing his mother's attention. Without hesitation, Su Junling threw the fox into the hay with all his strength, his eyes filled with the malicious intent of someone far beyond his years. The innocent-looking boy, often seen as fragile and meek, revealed a much darker side. Su Junling coldly explained that if the fox accidentally disappeared, then his mother would have no choice but to focus on him entirely. His eyes gleamed with a demonic light as he declared that he had decided to get rid of the pet, and he began to ponder the best way to kill the animal. Bailey, shocked by the boy's sudden cruelty, realized that the child who seemed so innocent was, in reality, harboring a blackened soul, brimming with evil. Despite this, Bailey remained calm, knowing that Su Junling, though a demon, was still just a child. However, when Su Junling returned moments later with a long rope, Bailey's heart raced. The boy's eyes were cold and emotionless, and it was clear that he had fully committed to the idea of strangling the fox. Just as Su Junling was about to carry out his sinister plan, Su Tang appeared, interrupting the moment. She noticed the rope in her son's hands, and the darkness surrounding him seemed to dissipate as he quickly hid the rope behind his back. His glowing, malevolent eyes softened into an innocent expression, and the malice vanished. Su Tang, sensing something was off, asked her son why he needed the rope. With a pitiful look, Su Junling lied, saying that he was just planning to tie the fox's mouth because he was scared of being bitten. Bailey, watching this display, was furious at the boy's hypocrisy. He knew that Su Junling had no intention of simply tying the fox's mouth, he was plotting to kill him. Su Tang, however, seemed pleased by her son's supposed thoughtfulness and praised him for being so considerate. She even offered to help him with the task. Bailey was horrified as Su Tang and her son worked together to bind his mouth, thinking about how this made his chances of escape even slimmer. Despite his growing dread, the fox had no choice but to remain still while they tied the rope around his snout. Once the task was finished, Su Junling picked up the fox, now bound and vulnerable, and assured his mother that she needn't worry. He claimed it was no trouble at all to take care of the pet. Su Tang, believing that her son had grown fond of the animal, smiled warmly. Before leaving the barn, she reminded the two to behave and not to cause any trouble during the night. Bailey, however, began to panic. He knew he couldn't be left alone with Su Junling. If he was, the boy would surely kill him. As Su Tang was about to leave, Bailey squirmed in Su Junling's arms, desperately trying to escape. He tugged on Su Tang's clothes with his tiny paws, his eyes pleading for her to stay. Su Tang, touched by what she saw as the fox's adorable behavior, assumed that the animal didn't want to be left alone with her son because it was still anxious around him. She remembered that Su Junling had been acting out of anger earlier, and thought the fox was nervous about being with the child during the night, fearing it could end badly. Su Tang, realizing the fox's beauty and grace, made a quick decision. She told Su Junling that she would allow the animal to stay in the palace for one more day. Bailey, despite his hatred for Su Tang, was grateful for the reprieve. At least for the time being, he wouldn't be left alone with the demonic child who clearly had sinister plans. Su Junling, however, tried to persuade his mother to let the fox stay in the barn, asking why it couldn't just stay there. But Su Tang explained that the animal was still injured and needed care, and it would be better to wait until it fully recovered. Resigned, Su Junling didn't argue, though the darkness in his heart deepened. After Su Tang left the barn, Su Junling's jealousy flared once again. He desperately wanted his mother's attention to be focused solely on him. He knew he couldn't openly ask her to get rid of the fox without revealing his true feelings, so he decided to bide his time and remain obedient to avoid angering her. But inside, the darkness consumed him, and his hatred for the fox intensified. Meanwhile, Su Tang made her way to the palace to speak with her father, Su Junling. He was well aware that she wanted to bring her son into the palace, and she informed him that she planned to do so in the next few days. Her father, however, was adamant that Su Junling, being part demon, should never be allowed into the palace. He reminded Su Tang that after her son's birth, she had lost her martial arts abilities, and their entire family had become a laughingstock because of it. Despite this, Su Junling explained that the only reason he hadn't banished the demon child was because Su Tang had given birth to him. Su Tang, her heart heavy, tried to argue that Su Junling wasn't a monster, he was her son, the grandson of a general. But Su Junling wouldn't budge. He told her flatly that he would never allow Su Junling to move into the palace. He believed his daughter couldn't possibly handle raising such a problematic child. Su Tang understood that if she failed in her mission to protect her son, both she and her son could face dire consequences. Her father reminded her that once she took over his position in the barracks, she could raise her child however she wanted. But for now, the demon was not welcome in the palace. The novel had mentioned that Su Junling held considerable military power. His second son was disabled and confined to a wheelchair, and his third child, who often dressed in women's clothing, was considered a disgrace. This left Su Tang, the only remaining capable child, to be the family's successor. She asked if there were any adopted children who could take her place in the barracks, but her father insisted that since she had chosen to care for the demon child, she would have to take up the service in his stead. Su Tang, though no longer able to practice martial arts, agreed to her father's proposal. Her most important goal was to secure a future for her son, a full life where he wouldn't be treated as an outcast. Su Tang went to the servants and declared that after the recent incident, the maids would no longer work for the madam. She was determined to change everything radically, ensuring that no one would dare to mistreat the child again. The servants trembled and knelt, begging for forgiveness. One of them tried to ask what exactly they had done wrong, and Su Tang clarified that the maids were supposed to follow orders and not harm Su Junling. She then stated her decision to speak with the main manager and reassign the maids to different roles. Su Tang, unwilling to continue the conversation with the offender, slammed the door and made her way into the palace. Once back in her room, she immediately got into hot water to unwind after a long day. After a while, Tang Tang lay down to sleep, knowing she had many things to handle the next day. She wrapped herself in a blanket and hugged the fox in her arms. She quickly drifted off to sleep, but the fox, Bailey, couldn't relax. The poor animal was freezing, shivering all over. It was said that Su Tang was the most beautiful woman in the Tendu state, and Bailey, still in his animal form, looked at her, acknowledging her beauty. He imagined what it would be like to transform into his human form and be close to her, but he quickly shook off such thoughts. Curling up into a ball, Bailey tried to think of something pleasant, but the cold continued to gnaw at him. Carefully, he slid under the blanket, finally feeling some warmth. Su Tang remained fast asleep, unaware of his movements. As she tossed and turned in her sleep, she felt the fox and began stroking his thick fur, causing Bailey to blush. Still in her sleep, she muttered for him to stop twitching. Embarrassed, Bailey hadn't expected the evening to take such a turn. It had been 6 years since anyone had touched him like that. His mind wandered to a past intimacy with someone he had shared warm nights with. At some point, Bailey noticed that the blanket had slipped off Su Tang's body. He immediately closed his eyes, determined not to take advantage of the situation despite his nerves. When morning came, Su Tang woke first, noticing that the fox's paws were resting on her chest. She wasn't thrilled and sternly remarked that, despite his attractive appearance, the fox had no right to act so familiar with her. Annoyed, she threw him onto the floor, got out of bed, wrapped a blanket around her lower body, and began preparing for the day. Knowing she had many responsibilities ahead, she hurried to get ready. Meanwhile, Bailey was left embarrassed by his hostess's candid display. Su Junling had already started working when Tang Tang saw the child struggling to fetch water from the well. She approached, confused about why the boy was making such an effort to retrieve cold water. He cheerfully explained that he was trying to wash some clothes. Recognizing the servant's garments, Su Tang took the boy's hands and assured him that he no longer needed to do the maid's tasks. The boy pulled his hands away, explaining that they were too cold, and he didn't want to cause discomfort. Su Junling stepped back, trying to warm his hands behind his back. He said that if he didn't wash the servant's clothes, he wouldn't be given food. Horrified by these rules, Tang Tang decided to change the subject. She asked the child when was the last time he had left the palace. Su Tong suggested that she and her son take a walk around the city together. Since she had a lot to do, the child would have plenty of time to explore. However, the boy replied that he wasn't allowed to leave the palace. The book had stated that demons held the lowest status in Tendu, and because of this, the Su family viewed him as an outcast, forbidding him from leaving. But Su Tong took Su Junling's hand, reassuring him that things were changing for him, and now he had the freedom to venture into the city. Together, they arrived at one of the busiest streets in town, with the boy marveling at the vibrant surroundings. Su Tong stopped at a stall and suggested they enjoy some tasty treats. Su Junling was surprised and asked if he could have some candy. Without hesitation, Tang Tang bought a couple of sugar-coated fruit sticks. Of course, she wasn't about to deny her son sweets. The boy took one, and given his small size, the treat seemed enormous. This was the first thing his mother had ever bought for him. Su Tong encouraged him to enjoy it quickly, as she had bought a large number of treats. The child took a bite, savoring the taste of the sugar-coated snack. He loved it, it was his first time trying tangmulu, and he was fully satisfied.
Tang Tang promised she could buy him anything he liked, whether roasted chestnuts or mooncakes.
They wandered through the market, buying a variety of items. As they continued their stroll, Su Tong noticed a pink mist surrounding Su Junling. The system explained that this mist indicated the boy was in a good mood, though it did little to remove the filth that supposedly clung to him. Nonetheless, Su Tong was delighted to see her child so happy. After an hour, they decided to take a break at a cafe. They had bought so many gifts for Su Junling that not everything could even fit on the table. He looked overjoyed, and it was clear that the taint surrounding him had started to lift. While they were relaxing, the fifth prince, Xuan Yuan, arrived at the cafe with his guards. He immediately approached Su Tong and her son, filled with disdain.
Xuan Yuan insulted his ex-wife, calling her brainless for bringing a demon into the city.
He taunted her, suggesting that she was trying to appease evil spirits by parading her child around. He then threatened to break the boy's legs in front of everyone. Su Junling was terrified, thinking that his mother had brought him to the city just to deliver him to an enemy. Despite the prince's threats, Tang Tang remained calm. She invited the prince to sit and have tea with her. As she poured tea from a communal jug, Xuan Yuan joked that he was afraid she might have poisoned the drink. She pushed the mug toward him, unfazed. The prince, scoffing at the idea that she would dare harm him, drank the tea without hesitation. After finishing the tea, he smugly declared that this was the beginning of the demon's punishment. He prepared to order his guards to arrest the boy, but suddenly, the prince doubled over in pain, clutching his stomach. As he rushed to leave, he demanded to know what Su Tong had put in the tea. She simply explained that she had also drunk from the same jug and felt fine. Xuan Yuan staggered past the guards, ordering them to capture both Tang Tang and Su Junling before heading back to the palace. But before he could make his exit, Su Tong stepped in front of him and joked that he must have been bitten by a rabid dog. Desperate, the prince begged her not to spread such rumors. By now, the entire cafe was filled with the foul odor of the prince's stomach ailment, and Su Junling, disgusted, covered his nose. People at nearby tables were whispering and laughing at the fifth prince's misfortune. Su Tong continued to mock him, telling him to hurry because his pants were already starting to sag. Xuan Yuan, now completely humiliated, collapsed to the floor, and the stench only grew stronger. The patrons laughed even harder. Xuan Yuan collapsed to the floor, the foul odor spreading through the cafe as the laughter of the patrons grew louder. Embarrassed and humiliated, the ex-husband vowed that he would kill Tang Tang someday. Keeping her composure, Tang Tang returned to her son and suggested they quickly leave the scene. The boy was relieved to see that his mother hadn't deceived him, and his eyes, once dull, now gleamed with kindness. Reaching out his hand, he happily held onto his mother. Tang Tang picked him up, and taking advantage of the confusion among the guards, she quickly fled the cafe. Once outside and sure that no one was chasing them, Su Tong put Su Junling down and tried to catch her breath. Su Junling, still giggling from the chaotic events, couldn't stop laughing. The system then notified Tang Tang that the boy's filth had decreased by 2%, and the heroine felt a sense of accomplishment for finally managing to reduce some of the darkness surrounding him. As evening approached, they decided it was time to return to the palace. A couple of days later, Mr. General, the emperor's chief assistant in the Tendu state, arrived at the Su family residence. He explained to General Su Janxian that he hadn't crossed paths with Bailey Yuan for a long time, but rumors were spreading that his son, Bowen, was hiding in the Su family home. The general, skeptical, was certain that even if all eligible bachelors in the empire were gone, Tang Tang wouldn't so much as glance in the direction of the chancellor's son, Bailey Bowen. Despite this, Emperor insisted there were witnesses who had seen Tang Tang interacting with Bailey. The situation escalated when the chancellor arrived at the palace, forcing the servants to open the gates. The quarrel was interrupted when Tang Tang herself emerged from the palace, holding the fox, Bailey, in her arms, who had fully recovered by this point. Confidently, she declared that she wasn't hiding the chancellor's son in her home. What she didn't realize, however, was that she was holding a man in the form of a fox. Bowen, the fox, deliberately looked away, hoping his father wouldn't recognize him in his animal form. To prove her innocence, Tang Tang invited the chancellor to search her palace. She even boldly stated that if nothing was found, the chancellor would have to personally apologize to everyone in the public square. Bailey Bowen glanced at Tang Tang, reminded of her deceased mother, who had been equally strong-willed. The general, enraged by the chancellor's persistent gaze on his daughter, threatened to kill Chancellor if he kept looking at her. Not backing down, Chancellor continued to argue, which led to a heated altercation between the two old men. Their children stood by silently, unwilling to intervene. Finally, Chancellor spoke up, saying that since Tang Tang had come out and explained everything, there was no need for a search. The general then revealed that he had deliberately delayed the confrontation to make the chancellor miss his scheduled audience with the emperor. Shortly afterward, both men were summoned to see the monarch. At the imperial court, Emperor Shainan greeted General Su and Chancellor. He mentioned the growing rumors that Tang Tang and Bailey were in love. Su Junling denied this, insisting his daughter had never met Bailey. However, the chancellor countered by pointing out that witnesses had seen Tang Tang throwing herself into Bailey's arms in public. Left with no other choice, both men reluctantly confirmed the rumors, despite their mutual dislike of the situation. The emperor then made a surprising declaration: since the two nobles' children were of the same age and in love, he intended to arrange their marriage. He emphasized the importance of choosing a favorable date for the wedding. After the audience with the emperor, the general rushed back to the palace, desperate for answers. Once home, Su Junling begged Tang Tang to tell him who her real lover was, offering to kidnap the man that very night. Both Tang Tang and Bailey, the fox, were utterly confused by the turn of events. The general began listing possible suitors, suggesting various candidates like a young man from the house of Lu, the son of the chief servant, or even the fifth prince. When he mentioned the fifth prince, he grew more serious and remarked that Bailey Yuani could be in his daughter's bed within a couple of hours. Tang Tang, bewildered, couldn't grasp why her father was taking such extreme measures. The general then explained the gravity of the situation. The emperor intended to marry Tang Tang to the chancellor's son, Bailey, a match that neither party expected. However, this engagement was not merely about love or compatibility, it was political. The emperor had issued a decree for the marriage, and the Su family's attempts to resist the engagement had already resulted in severe consequences. The emperor had used their resistance as a pretext to strip the general of 100,000 of his military forces, and Bailey was set to lose a great deal as well. The stakes were high, and neither family was happy with the emperor's decision. Since she had to give a substantial amount of money to the treasury to resolve the matter, Su Tong acknowledged that she couldn't defy the emperor's decree without harming her family. The general, her father, would certainly be blamed for any defiance. Just then, a hint from the system popped up, indicating that Su Junling's father's love could help reduce the boy's filth. Su Tong remembered her primary mission. She began to suspect that Su Junling's biological father might be Bailey Yuani. The book had mentioned that Su Tong had an affair with a man who had a distinctive birthmark on his torso, and, as it turned out, young Bailey had the same feature. It made sense to her now. Tang Tang had been struggling to reduce Su Junling's taint because the child needed his father's love, not his mother's. So, Su Tong requested her father to take Bailey to the palace. The fox tensed up, and his fur bristled with anxiety. Her father warned that Bailey's household was a tiger's den, and Bailey himself had a reputation for being two-faced and hypocritical, with rumors that he had killed all of his daughters-in-law. Bailey, hearing this, was confused, wondering how he had gained such a terrible reputation. After all, those women had died of natural causes, and he had never played any part in their deaths. Su Tong realized she had no other choice and, somewhat embarrassed, openly admitted that she had fallen in love with Mr. Bailey. Both the general and her lover were baffled by her sudden declaration. Her father asked what was so special about Bailey that had caught her attention. Flustered, Tang Tang explained that Bailey had a beautiful voice and a strong, impressive physique. Blushing, she added that he simply seemed sympathetic to her. Su Junling was unimpressed, remarking that Bailey was no different from other men, with 2 eyes and a nose, and even pointed out that he was quite thin. He believed his daughter needed a big, strong man as a father figure for her child. Tang Tang hugged her father and reassured him that, of course, the general was the bravest and best man of all. She then floated the idea that she might even be pregnant with Bailey's child. This news did not sit well with her father. Furious, he asked why she was intentionally provoking him. Tang Tang, in response, fell to her knees and said that if he was so angry, she was ready to accept any punishment, even execution. The fox, still in his animal form, was puzzled by Su Tong's lies, as none of this was her fault. However, he noticed a clever glint in her eyes, realizing that she was manipulating the situation. Bailey concluded that he needed to return to his true form and leave as soon as possible since his injury had healed and he could now transform back into a human. Later that evening, Tang was happy to have convinced her father to support her. She picked up the fox in her arms and was ready to go home, but suddenly, she heard someone yelling from behind. Turning around, she saw that someone was arguing with Su Junling, using cruel and demeaning words. The child was standing in the middle of the courtyard, surrounded by a thick black fog, a sign of his emotional turmoil. Enraged, Tang wanted to know who dared to insult her son. A maid nearby was sneering, assuring Su Junling that once his mother married into the Bailey family, he would be left behind in the stables, allowing the servants to mock the demon as much as they pleased. Su Junling, refusing to believe the maid's words, argued that his mother had promised she would never abandon him. But the servant laughed cruelly, pointing out that not even the general could stop Tang from going through with the engagement. Feeling defeated, the boy started to believe that his relationship with his mother would deteriorate. The maid continued her taunts, telling him that as soon as Tang moved into the Bailey mansion, she would likely have more children and forget all about him. Su Junling's anger and frustration grew, and he struggled to contain his emotions. Finally, the maid added that even Su Junling's own mother didn't want him, and that he would have to endure endless ridicule. Overcome with rage, the boy snapped. He attacked the maid, pushing her to the ground. As the servant tried to get back up, Su Junling, his anger boiling over, reasoned that if the maid were dead, there would be no more bullying or vile words. He grabbed an axe, his demonic nature flaring. He declared that anyone who insulted his mother deserved to be killed. The maid, now furious, decided to retaliate. She vowed to beat the outcast to death, but before she could act, Tang arrived just in time. Without hesitation, she struck the maid hard, causing the servant's vision to blur. The situation had escalated, but Tang had stepped in, defending her son. The maid desperately tried to make excuses, claiming she was only supervising the boy's work and had done nothing wrong. Meanwhile, Tang, holding her head in frustration, turned to her son, who was visibly upset. He asked if what the maid had said was true. Would his mother abandon him after she got married? Su Tong firmly reassured him that even after the wedding, she would still love him. She then turned her attention back to the maid, stating that this wasn't the first time Kuo had violated orders. The maid was told to pack her things and leave the palace immediately. Desperate, the servant pleaded that she would starve without the job, but Tang remained unmoved and walked away, ignoring the maid's apologies. Out in the garden, Tang noticed her son was wearing old clothes. She asked why, and Su Junling explained that he had been working and didn't want to get his new suit dirty. Su Tang asked why the child was wearing old clothes, and her son explained that he was working and didn't want to ruin his new suit. She reassured him that he could wear regular clothes, as new things could always be bought. After a while, the child cleaned himself up, and Su Tang asked if he missed his father. Since he was young, people had mocked him, saying he was an outcast without a proper father, perhaps even a demon. Su Junling suggested that if his mother remarried, he would have another parent, to which he clarified that it would mean having someone else to love him. However, the boy expressed a desire to remain with Su Tang. Su Junling then asked to borrow a fox cub to play with. Bailey hoped the girl would refuse, but Su Tang gave him the animal without hesitation, cautioning him that it was still wounded and needed gentle handling. That night, the boy took the fox to the barn. Su Junling warned that the fox was in poor condition and should be gotten rid of. Su Junling seized the animal by the muzzle, implying it would be over quickly and painlessly. However, Bailey seized the moment when the demon went to fetch an axe, and the fox managed to dash for the exit. It leapt over the fence, which relieved the child, who hoped the fox wouldn't return to the palace. Meanwhile, at Bailey's home, his parents worried about him. The emperor suspected the chancellor's family was hiding their son to avoid a marriage decree, but the boy arrived in time, having just reverted to his human form, which had delayed him. Lu, his mother, was relieved to see him back, as she had been very concerned. The chancellor assumed Bailey was aware of the situation and proposed hiding him before formally refusing the emperor. Bailey reassured them, declaring he was prepared to marry Su Tang. The father noted that previous brides had mysteriously died on their wedding night, but this time, the son seemed proactive.
Bailey suggested that resisting could bring great losses to their family.
He paused, recalling a past encounter with Su Tang, but his father urged him to continue.
Young Bailey then proposed using the marriage strategically to undermine enemy families from within. Bowen supported the plan, and the father reminded him to keep his shape-shifting ability a secret.
After their conversation, Bailey returned to his room and prepared to wash, but his wound ached, prompting him to get his medicine. He found himself thinking about Su Tang, remembering her treatment of the fox and her gentle touch on his wound. Distracted, he spilled the medicine, unable to understand why he couldn't stop thinking about her. Frustrated, he lay down to sleep but again found his mind drifting to his future wife. Even though he hadn't seen her recently, he couldn't forget her image. The next day, the nobles gathered at the emperor's palace. Shainenin asked for the wedding dates to be calculated, and the astrologers reported that the ideal day was only a few nights away.
Surprised, the emperor questioned the accuracy, but the nobles confirmed and expressed their gratitude.
Shainenin hadn't anticipated their humility, especially since he had planned to reduce the power of the older families. Arranging this marriage seemed wise, as it might resolve a long-standing feud between the two families. The emperor suspected that the general and the chancellor had plans of their own and chose to observe carefully. On the eve of the wedding, only 2 of the 3 original servants remained with Su Tang. One remarked that a woman with an illegitimate child was trying to marry, while another noted that the chancellor's son had married multiple times, with all his brides meeting tragic ends, which had ruined his reputation.
Su Tang's maids began helping her dress, but one suggested dismissing them, knowing they spoke the truth. Su Tang chose to keep them, wanting to find a way to confirm whether Bailey was indeed Su Junling's father.
Su Yan's best friend, Xiaowana, entered the room and suggested that Miss Su was being forced to marry Mr. Bailey. She claimed she was there to help Su Tang escape from the wedding. According to the book, it was Xiaowana who had convinced the heroine to spend the night with a man, thereby ruining her engagement and damaging her reputation. Xiaowana went on to insist that the 5th prince had feelings for Su Tang and that Bailey despised his bride. She hinted that Shan Yuani wanted Su Tang to come to the grove, describing him as sly and cunning. Xiaowana claimed the prince wanted to save and hide Su Tang from marriage because he was still in love with his ex-wife. In the book, Su Tang had trusted Xiaowana, who ultimately betrayed her friend in an attempt to ruin her. This time, however, the heroine was not so easily fooled. Su Tang took her friend's hands and asked if what she was saying was true. Xiaowana confirmed that if Su Tang went to the prince, he would quickly return to his ex-wife. Pretending to believe her friend, Su Tang said she would go to the grove immediately.
Xiaowana rejoiced, thinking Su Tang had decided to flee the wedding.
Su Tang played along, grabbing Xiaowana's hand and suggesting they get ready quickly to make it in time. Unlike her book counterpart, this Su Tang was fully aware of the intentions of those around her. Xiaowana suggested they take a few things, but Su Tang replied that she needed nothing, as she was about to become a princess. This angered Xiaowana, who found Su Tang's optimism naive, but she was pleased that Su Tang's happiness would soon be short-lived. The 2 women left the palace, and after some time, arrived at the grove where the 5th prince, Shan Yuani, was waiting. He invited Su Tang to join him on the bridge, eager to finally exact revenge on his ex-wife for all the humiliation he had endured. The prince explained that he knew of Su Tang's hatred for Bailey and wanted to help her escape the palace. Su Tang listened to his story, curious about the extent of Shan Yuani's deception. The prince clarified that, as a member of the imperial family, he couldn't openly steal a bride from the palace. Instead, he suggested that Su Tang would need to swim down the river to meet him outside the palace walls. Su Tang was offended, recognizing that he was trying to trick her. She thought it was absurd that he believed she would be naive enough to fall for this. Left alone in the river in the middle of the night, she would be completely vulnerable. Shan Yuani noticed her dress was oversized, which could slow her down in the water. He planned to have all the guests arrive while she was undressed, humiliating her. Feigning gratitude, Su Tang sarcastically complimented the prince on his kindness and care for his ex-wife. Taking his hand, she stepped closer to him and, with a swift movement, pushed him into the water. He fell headfirst, unable to react in time, and began sinking like a stone. Xiaowana, shocked and panicked, asked why Su Tang had pushed the prince into the water.
Without hesitation, Su Tang suggested that if Xiao Wanu was so worried, she could join him.
With little effort, she pushed Xiao Wanu into the water as well. Both the prince and Xiao Wanu flailed in the water, unable to swim, helplessly splashing like children. Hearing the commotion, Su Janzang, Su Tang's father, quickly arrived at the scene and climbed onto the bridge. Su Tang saw her father and expected to be scolded. However, he reassured her that everything was fine, as he had arrived just in time. The old man was more interested in the prince and Xiao Wanu's predicament. Su Tang calmly explained that Shan Yuanyi and Miss Xia had decided to take a swim. Her father speculated that the prince might have been trying to abduct Su Tang, but she assured him that wasn't the case. Hugging her father, Su Tang told him not to worry, she had no plans of running away. Su Tang declared that she loved Bailey and was eagerly looking forward to their wedding. Unbeknownst to her, the young man had overheard everything and was standing right behind her. A crowd gathered, surprised, as everyone had assumed that Su Tang was trying to run away. Instead, the situation turned into a public confession to young Bailey. When Su Tang noticed her future husband, an awkward silence fell between them, and both turned red with embarrassment. The chancellor laughed, remarking on the elaborate performance that Shan Yuanyi had staged just to draw attention. The general quipped that the fifth prince had devised a brilliant way to arrange a bath for two. Shan Yuanyi tried to defend himself, claiming that Su Tang had summoned him to the bridge to try and seduce him. Bailey, however, questioned why, if she intended to get close to the prince, he was now in the water with another woman. Su Tang was surprised to find her groom supporting her. Shan Yuanyi attempted to save face, saying he had jumped off the bridge on purpose to resist temptation. Xiao Wanu, who was flustered after her own unplanned swim, invited the prince to leave with her, still disoriented from the commotion. Su Tang dismissed their excuses, stating she never had feelings for the fifth prince and asked them not to put on such ridiculous performances again, especially in the cold night air. Bailey declared that Shan Yuanyi should keep his distance, as Su Tang was about to marry a real man. The prince tried to calm his distraught companion, while Su Tang suggested everyone go home, since the couple in the water still had unfinished business to sort out. The general added, half-jokingly, that the prince should be careful not to catch a cold, and the chancellor remarked that perhaps they should find a drier location. Shan Yuanyi was seething, as his entire scheme had backfired, with Su Tang ultimately coming out on top. As Su Tang and Bailey walked back toward the palace, she noticed just how much taller he was than her, a trait she found quite attractive. As they were nearing the entrance, Su Tang stumbled on a small stone and fell. Before she could catch herself, Bailey quickly reached out, and she ended up falling directly onto him. Both of them blushed at the unexpected closeness. Catching her breath, Su Tang noticed that their fathers were watching. The chancellor remained calm, but her father, Su Janxiang, looked displeased. To play along and defuse the situation, Su Tang pressed herself closer to young Bailey, resting her head against his chest. Taking advantage of the moment, Bailey asked if Su Tang truly loved him. She confirmed, thinking to herself that if it weren't for her mission, she wouldn't have even looked at him. Bailey held her a little tighter, and Su Tang wondered if he was about to give her their first kiss. He confessed that he wanted to understand if what they felt was genuine love or something else. Su Tang, worried that he was starting to see through her act, asked what he thought might be a setup. Without warning, she leaned in and kissed him on the cheek, hoping to maintain her cover. Bailey was momentarily lost in thought, but her father interrupted, asking what they were doing. Su Janxiang pulled his daughter away and stood protectively in front of her, ordering Bailey to stop. Su Tang suddenly winced in pain, and her father asked what was wrong. She explained that she might have twisted her ankle, as it seemed to be swelling. Concerned, Su Janxiang decided to carry her home, intending to call a doctor as soon as they arrived. Su Tang didn't resist, allowing herself to be carried back to the palace. As they neared the estate, her father reminisced about how, as a child, she used to love riding on his back like a little horse. However, now that he was older, he worried he might not be able to play with her like that anymore. Su Tang reassured him, insisting he was still young and one of the most powerful people in the world. Her father then asked if she truly wanted to marry Bailey, offering to oppose the marriage decree if she had any doubts. Su Janxiang admitted that he would actually be happy if Su Tang truly escaped, as he wanted her to be free and avoid suffering in Bailey's household. Once back at the estate, her father gently sat her down on a bench and told her that, if she truly loved Bailey, he hoped she would find happiness in her new life. Su Tang stopped him, reassuring her father that once she was married to Bailey, she would still visit him regularly. Su Junling was pleased with this promise and felt comforted. Meanwhile, the young child in the household was getting ready for the move, carefully packing his most essential belongings into a bag. Su Junling decided to take a lamp, thinking it could be useful for his mother, as a candle was always handy, even in the morning. Su Tang promised her son she would return soon, and to seal her promise, they crossed their little fingers. The boy was thrilled that his mother, Su Tang, was getting married. He packed a small bag and mentally prepared himself for a positive day. Returning to the barn, he reached up to grab his smart clothes from the hanger, understanding that today was an important day for his mother. He wanted to wear his best suit to make sure he looked presentable and didn't embarrass Su Tang at the wedding. As he settled back into his sleeping place, his biggest hope was that his mother would bring him home to live with her and her new husband. Suddenly, two men appeared near the barn. One, who had a mustache, identified Su Junling as the demon and said they needed to capture him quickly. Su Junling tried to resist, struggling to understand who these men were and what they wanted. They silenced him by covering his mouth and twisting his arms, then began climbing over the fence with him. The poor boy, in pain, stopped resisting, hoping desperately that his mother would find him and save him from his captors. Meanwhile, the wedding day had dawned, and Su Tang was woken early by her servants. Though she wanted to sleep a bit longer, there was no time. Her father, Su Junling, entered her room and instructed her to go eat right after she was fully awake, as she couldn't afford to be hungry on such an important day. Su Tang quickly changed and tidied her hair, then joined her family in the kitchen. Her father, Su's middle son, and her eldest brother, Su Jiren, were already seated at the table, and the servants had prepared a lavish breakfast to ensure she wouldn't go hungry. Su Junling invited everyone to start eating, and Su Tang was surprised by the variety of dishes. While she eagerly ate the meat, her brothers picked at their salads. She noticed their strange expressions and asked why they were looking at her that way. Su Jili, one of her brothers, explained that the family could easily support her and asked why she was willing to marry despite the emperor's decree. The Su family had the power to resist the monarch's demands, after all. Her other brothers suggested that perhaps the chancellor had pressured her into the engagement. They assured her they were ready to help her with anything she needed. Su Tang reassured them that she had no problems, thanks to the support of her entire family. She recalled that Bailey's house was located only a few hundred meters from the general's palace and promised she would have lunch with her new husband and be back home for dinner. Su Jiren, seeing that she was committed to the marriage, wished her happiness and presented her with a carefully prepared gift. Her middle brother reminded her that if Bailey ever mistreated her, she could always return home, and handed her a small box tied with a red ribbon. Grateful for her family's support, Su Tang finished dressing for the wedding. Just as she was about to leave, Su Tang noticed that her son hadn't been brought to the palace. She asked a servant why Su Junling hadn't arrived yet, and the worker explained that the servants sent to the barn couldn't find him. Alarmed, Su Tang ordered them to search the barn again and hurried over herself. When she reached her son's quarters, she felt a pang of worry. Su Junling would never leave the mansion on his own, and seeing his belongings left behind, she realized something was wrong. As more guests arrived at the palace, Su Tang's distress grew. She approached her father, who was speaking with a guest, and cried out for his attention. Suspecting that her father might have hidden her son, she confronted him. Su Junling dismissed her concerns, saying there was no time to worry about this because the wedding was about to start. Frustrated, Su Tang demanded to know where her son was and threatened to call off the engagement if she didn't get an answer. Her father, rather than being moved by her threat, seemed pleased at the prospect. Her eldest brother chimed in, suggesting that if she truly wished to refuse the marriage, they could celebrate the occasion with a 3-day, 3-night feast. Realizing she was running out of options and determined not to go through with the wedding without her son, Su Tang took a drastic step. She pulled a hairpin from her hair and declared that if her family refused to tell her where Su Junling was, she would end her life right there in the hall. Her father finally responded, explaining that Bailey's household might not accept a demon child into their family, which could lead to complications for Su Tang. Ignoring his excuses, she demanded once more to know her son's location. Relenting, her father revealed that Su Junling had been taken to a barracks 10 miles away from the wedding venue. Su Xiang told his daughter that if she refused the marriage, her son would be returned to her, otherwise, she would need to forget about him. Su Tang, however, declared that she chose both options, refusing to be forced into such a decision. Her father attempted to dissuade her, but Su Tang stood firm. She ordered a maid to bring pen and paper, instructing the servant to deliver a letter to Bailey's chambers if she didn't make it back in time for the wedding. Su Tang prepared quickly and mounted a horse, which the servant explained was an ambassador's horse, one that knew the route to the barracks well. Determined, Su Tang set off for the place where her son was hidden. A few wedding guests saw her departure and assumed she was running away from her own wedding.